morning we buried my grandfather, the sky over Harlan County was the kind of pale gray that doesn't commit to rain or clearing, just hangs there. Indifferent, like the weather itself couldn't be bothered to have an opinion about the death of an 87-year-old farmer who'd spent his entire life inside a 12-mile radius. There were 14 people at the service, and I knew all of them by name, and none of them well. My mother didn't come. She'd stopped speaking to him 8 years ago after the third time he refused to sell the farm and move closer to family. She said he chose that land over his own daughter. I used to think she was being dramatic. I don't think that anymore. My name is Caleb Morrow. I was 31 years old when Grandpa Earl died in his sleep on September 14th. And I was the only person in the family willing to drive out to the property to handle the estate. Nobody wanted the farm. Not my mother, not my Aunt Ruth, and certainly not my cousin Derek, who'd visited exactly once at age 9 and refused to go back. The official reason was that the property was too remote, too much work, no cell service, 40 minutes from the nearest town worth the name. All true. But the real reason, the one nobody said aloud, was simpler than that. The farm felt wrong. It had always felt wrong. And everyone in the family knew it, even if they'd all chosen different words for the feeling. I was the exception. I had spent 4 summers there as a boy, ages 7 through 10, and those were the best years of my childhood. Not because the farm was charming, it wasn't. It was 160 acres of cattle pasture, tobacco bottoms, and dense hardwood forest wedged into a hollow between 2 sandstone ridges in East Tennessee. The house was a drafty 2-story clapboard that my great-grandfather had built during the Depression. The barn was older than that. The creek that ran along the eastern boundary smelled like iron and tasted like pennies. It was not the kind of place that appeared in pastoral fantasies, but Grandpa Earl was there. And for a kid whose parents were in the early stages of a divorce that would eventually turn vicious, whose home was a 2-bedroom apartment in Knoxville where the walls were too thin to block the sound of arguments, that farm was the only place in the world where I felt safe. Grandpa didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain things he thought you could figure out yourself. He gave you a task and he trusted you to do it. And when you did it right, he'd nod once, like that was all the praise a person needed. I loved him in the way you love someone who shows you that adults can be steady. That love never went away, even during the years I didn't visit, even when my mother told me he was selfish and strange. Even when I became an adult myself and started to remember certain things about those summers that didn't quite make sense in daylight. The rules, for instance. Grandpa had 7 rules for the farm. He told me all of them on my first visit, the summer I was 7, sitting on the porch while the sun dropped behind the western ridge and the hollow filled up with blue shadow like water pouring into a bowl. He said them plainly, without drama. The same way he'd tell you to check the oil in the tractor or latch the chicken coop. These were not stories, they were not games. They were operational instructions, and he expected them followed. I'll put them down here the way I remember them. Some of the phrasing might be off, I was 7, but the substance is right. I know because he repeated them every summer, and by the time I was 10, I could recite them back to him word for word. Rule 1. Lock every gate at sundown, even the ones that don't lead anywhere. Rule 2. If the creek runs clear after dark, stay inside. Don't go out until it's muddy again in the morning. Rule 3. Don't pick anything from the northeast corner of the property. Don't plant there. Don't mow it. Let it grow. Rule 4. If the cattle all face the same direction without cause, count them. If the number's wrong, come inside and don't look for the extra. Rule 5. Keep the iron ring on the barn's lower door oiled and latched. If you find it open, close it without looking through. Rule 6. On the 1st and 15th of every month, leave a plate of food on the fence post where the property meets the tree line. Don't watch what takes it. Rule 7. Never open the stone door at the bottom of the barn. I don't care what you hear. I don't care whose voice it is. You do not open that door. He gave me reasons for most of them. Rule 1 was about keeping the cattle in and the coyotes out, except it wasn't because some of those gates were just iron frames standing in open pasture, connected to nothing. Relics of fences that had rotted away decades ago. I asked him once why I needed to lock a gate with no fence, and he said, "A gate's a gate whether there's a fence or not. A door is a door whether there's a wall." I was 8. I didn't push it. Rule 2 he blamed on flash flooding. The creek could rise fast after a mountain storm, and clear water meant the sediment had settled upstream, which meant a surge was coming. Stay inside. Made sense. Except I noticed the creek sometimes ran clear on perfectly dry nights, and Grandpa would still pull me in from the porch and lock the door and sit in his chair with the shotgun across his knees until morning. Rules 3 and 4 were about property boundaries and cattle management or so, he said. Rule 5 was about barn maintenance. Rule 6 was for the neighbors, a tradition he claimed, from the old families in the hollow who used to leave offerings for good harvest. I believed that one until I was about 9 and realized there were no neighbors. The nearest house was 6 miles away, across a ridge, and it had been abandoned since before I was born. Rule 7 he never explained at all. When I asked why, he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Not anger, not fear exactly, but something worse. Exhaustion. Like the question itself had weight, and he was already carrying too much. Because I said so, he told me. And because I love you. That was the only time I ever heard my grandfather say that. I never asked about Rule 7 again. I want to talk about my brother. Ely was 4 years older than me, which meant he'd been coming to the farm longer, which meant he knew things about the property I didn't. He was the one who showed me the swimming hole upstream, where the creek pooled against a limestone shelf. He was the one who taught me to identify copperheads from king snakes by the shape of their pupils. And he was the one who told me, in a whisper, on a night when the creek had run clear and Grandpa was downstairs with his shotgun, that there was something underneath the barn. I've heard it, he said. We were sharing the upstairs bedroom, lying in the dark. The window was open and the air smelled like cut hay, and something older, something mineral. It talks, Caleb, not words exactly, but it knows you're there. It knows your name. I was 7. I thought he was trying to scare me. Brothers do that. Eli disappeared. The summer I was 8. July 19th, he was 12. The official story was drowning. He'd gone to the swimming hole alone, hit his head on the limestone shelf, went under. They never found his body. The creek was searched. The pond was drained. Dogs were brought in. Nothing. When my grandfather told the sheriff that the current must have carried him downstream into the cave system that ran beneath the ridge, the sheriff accepted this. The case was closed. My parents' marriage, already fracturing, shattered entirely. My mother blamed my grandfather for letting Eli go to the creek alone. My father blamed my mother for sending the boys to the farm in the first place. Within a year, they were divorced. Within 2, my father had moved to Oregon. I never went back to the farm until now. I drove out on a Thursday in late September, 2 days after the funeral. My wife Nina was going to join me on Saturday. She'd offered to come sooner, but I told her I wanted a night alone on the property first. I told her it was about processing my grief, saying goodbye in private. That was partially true, but the fuller truth was that I wanted to check the rules. I wanted to walk the fence line and see if the gates were locked. I wanted to look at the barn. I wanted to stand at the top of those stone stairs and listen. I hadn't been to the farm in 21 years, but I could have driven the route blindfolded, past the Sunoco station where Route 32 splits, left at the burned-out church, down the gravel road that winds along the creek for 3 miles until the hollow opens up, and there it is. The house on the left, the barn behind it, the pasture rising up to the ridge, and that flat, gray sky pressing down on all of it like a lid. The farm looked smaller than I remembered. That's what everyone says about childhood places, and it's usually just a trick of perspective. But in this case, I think the farm had genuinely contracted. The pasture was overgrown. The fence line along the road was sagging. The cattle Grandpa had kept about 30 head of Angus in his prime were down to maybe a dozen, clustered at the far end of the field near the tree line. They watched me pull up with that dull bovine attention. That means nothing and somehow still feels like judgment. The house was unlocked. Grandpa never locked the house. I stepped inside and the smell hit me immediately. Wood smoke, coffee grounds, linseed oil, and underneath all of it, the sour-sweet note of a place where a very old man had lived alone for a very long time. The kitchen was clean. The living room was tidy. His chair, a cracked leather recliner positioned to face the window that looked out toward the barn, had a wool blanket folded over the arm. There was a glass of water on the side table, half full, like he'd just gotten up, like he was going to come back. I set my bag down and walked the property before the light failed. The gates first. There were 9 of them, scattered along the fence line in various states of repair, 5 connected to actual fences. 4 were freestanding iron frames bolted to concrete posts, standing alone in the grass like the skeletons of something that had never been finished. All 9 were latched. I checked each one, oiled the hinges on the 2 that were stiff, and locked them with the heavy iron padlocks that hung from their crossbars. The sun was getting low. I worked faster. The barn was next. It was a massive post and beam structure, painted red once but now weathered to the color of dried blood. The main doors were shut around the right side. At ground level was a smaller door, heavy oak, banded with iron, with a ring pulled the size of my fist. The lower door, the one that led to the stairs, I checked the ring. It was latched. The iron was oiled recently within the last few weeks. Grandpa had been maintaining it right up to the end. I put my hand on the ring and held it for a moment, feeling the cold of the metal seep into my palm, and then I let go and walked back to the house. I didn't hear anything. I want to be clear about that. That first evening, standing at the top of those stairs, I heard nothing, just the wind in the barn's upper loft and the distant, indifferent sound of cattle shifting in the pasture. The creek ran clear that night. I noticed it around 9 o'clock. I'd eaten a can of soup, heated on Grandpa's propane stove, and was sitting in his chair, looking out the window at nothing, when I realized I could see the creek from the house. Just a sliver of it, catching the moonlights between the barn and the tree line. It was silver, not the muddy brown gray I remembered. Silver, like glass, like something polished. I got up, locked the front door, locked the back door, and pulled the curtains. Then I sat in the chair with my hands in my lap and waited for morning. I didn't bring the shotgun. I didn't even know where it was. I just sat there in the dark and listened to the house settle around me and thought about Eli and wondered what I was doing here. I slept. Eventually, shallow, restless sleep full of half-dreams about the swimming hole, and my brother's voice and something moving through tall grass. When I woke up, the creek was muddy again. The cattle were grazing normally, spread out across the pasture in their usual random scatter. Everything looked exactly the way a farm is supposed to look on a Friday morning in September. I spent the day going through Grandpa's things. His clothes went into garbage bags, his kitchen was sorted into keep, donate, and trash. The living room was sparse, the chair, a side table, a shelf of books that were mostly agricultural manuals, and a King James Bible with a cracked spine. I packed the Bible. My mother wouldn't want it, but I couldn't throw it away. The bedroom was upstairs. I hadn't been up there yet. The staircase creaked the way it always had, each step announcing itself in a different pitch. And when I reached the top, I stood in the hallway and looked at the 2 doors. Grandpa's room on the left, the boys' room on the right, the room where Eli and I had slept. I opened Grandpa's door first. It was spare. A single bed, made with military corners, a dresser, a wardrobe, a window facing east, toward the ridge. On the nightstand, a reading lamp, a pair of glasses, and a photograph in a plain wooden frame. I picked it up. It was me and Eli, standing by the barn. I was maybe 7. Eli was 11. We were squinting into the sun, and Eli had his arm around my shoulder. And behind us, the barn door was open, and you could see the shadow inside. And in the shadow, this might have been a trick of the light or the camera or my own desperate pattern matching mind, there was a shape, upright, still, watching. I set the photograph down and opened the wardrobe. Clothes, boots, a hat. Nothing unusual. I checked the dresser, socks, handkerchiefs, a pocket knife. Normal. I almost left. But something about the room felt incomplete. My grandfather was not a complicated man, but he was a careful one. He kept records. He tracked rainfall, cattle weight, crop yield, everything written down in composition notebooks that I'd seen stacked in the kitchen. But this room had no paper in it. No notebooks, no letters, nothing written at all except the Bible downstairs. I found the lockbox under the floorboard because I stepped on the wrong board and it moved. It was a simple metal box. The kind you'd keep cash in, hidden beneath the pine plank next to the bed. No lock. I opened it. Inside was a leather-bound journal, 2 photographs, and a key. The key was iron, heavy and black, about 4 inches long. It looked old, not antique shop old, but genuinely old, handmade. The kind of thing a blacksmith would forge. I set it aside and picked up the journal. The first entry was dated March 7th, 2004. The year Eli disappeared. I didn't read it then. Nina was arriving the next morning, and I wanted to finish the downstairs before she came. I also, if I'm being honest, was afraid of what it said. So I put the journal back in the box and the box in my bag and went downstairs and made coffee and tried to pretend I was just a man cleaning out his dead grandfather's house. Nina pulled up Saturday morning in the Subaru, gravel crunching under the tires, and the relief I felt when she stepped out of the car surprised me. I hadn't realized how much the silence of the farm had been pressing in on me. She hugged me in the driveway, and then leaned back and looked at the property with that frank, assessing gaze she had. Nina was a civil engineer, and she looked at everything like she was calculating its load-bearing capacity. "It's beautiful," she said, which was generous. "It's a lot of work," I said. "Is that the barn? It's huge." "Yeah, don't go in there." She looked at me. "Why not?" "Structural issues," I said. "Grandpa mentioned it." I hadn't told Nina about the rules. We'd been married 3 years, together for 5. And in all that time, I talked about the farm in the way people talk about childhood places, fondly, vaguely, with the edges smoothed off. I told her about Eli, of course. She knew my brother had drowned. She knew it had broken my family. But I'd never mentioned the gates that led nowhere, or the creek, or the plate of food on the fence post. Certainly not the stone door. Some things sound insane in a Knoxville apartment with the TV on. And I'd convinced myself years ago that the rules were just the eccentricities of an old man living alone in the middle of nowhere, managing his solitude with ritual. I believe that. Mostly, we worked through Saturday together, and it was good to have her there. We sorted the kitchen, cleaned the bathroom, stripped the beds. Nina found a box of old photographs in the hallway closet and spent an hour going through them, asking me to identify people I didn't recognize. Around 4 in the afternoon, I went to check the gate. Nina offered to come along. "You don't have to," I said. "I want to see the property. How big is it?" 160 acres, the fence line's about 3 miles. We walked it together. She asked about the freestanding gates, why they were there, what they'd been for. I told her they were from old fence lines that had been taken down. She pointed out that there were no post holes near them, no evidence that a fence had ever been attached. I told her I didn't know. She let it go. When we passed the northeast corner, she stopped. "What happened here?" The northeast corner was wild. That was the only word for it. The rest of the pasture was overgrown but recognizably managed grass that needed mowing, fence that needed mending. The northeast corner was something else. The grass was waist high and thick, choked with blackberry canes and sumac and something that might have been kudzu but moved differently in the wind, heavier like it had weight. The trees at the edge of the forest leaned toward the clearing as if they were reaching for something. The light was different there. Not darker. Exactly. Thinner. Like the air itself had less substance. "Grandpa never worked that section," I said. "Some kind of soil issue." Nina nodded, but she was looking at the ground near the fence line where the grass met the pasture. "The cattle don't go near it either," she said. She was right. The herd was clustered at the opposite end of the field. Not one animal within 200 yards of the northeast corner. "Cattle are picky," I said. "Cattle are not picky," she said. "That's literally the whole point of cattle." We finished the walk. I locked the last gate as the sun touched the western ridge. Nina watched me do it with an expression that was curious but not yet worried. That night, after dinner, I sat in the chair and read the journal. I'll try to summarize what my grandfather wrote, because some of it was rambling and some of it was repetitive and some of it honestly was hard to read. His handwriting deteriorated over the years. The early entries were crisp, careful printing. The later ones were shaky, and the sentences sometimes trailed off mid-thought. The first entry, March 7th, 2004, began. The boy came back from the northeast corner wrong. My grandfather wrote that Eli had been playing near the tree line that bordered the northeast section on July 17th, 2 days before the official date of his disappearance. Grandpa was fixing a fence on the opposite side of the property. When he came back to the house for lunch, Eli was sitting on the porch steps, staring at nothing. Grandpa asked if he was hungry. Eli didn't answer. Grandpa waved his hand in front of the boy's face. Eli's eyes tracked the motion, but slowly, like something was operating them from a great distance. By evening, Eli was talking again, but the rhythm was off. He'd pause in strange places. He'd start a sentence and then stop and cock his head like he was listening to something. When Caleb, when I, 7 years old, said something to him at dinner, Eli looked at me and smiled, and Grandpa wrote that the smile went on too long. It held past the point where a boy would have stopped smiling, like it was studying how a face worked. That night, Grandpa checked on Eli in the boys' room. Eli was asleep, but his eyes were open, not half open. The way people's eyes sometimes are when they sleep, wide open, fixed on the ceiling, and his mouth was moving, not forming words, just moving, working, like something inside was testing the mechanism. Grandpa sat with him until dawn. Eli woke up and seemed normal, confused that Grandpa was in the room, hungry, asking when we could go to the swimming hole. But something had shifted. Grandpa could feel it. He wrote, "He's my grandson and I love him, but something is in there with him now. Something came back wearing him and it isn't finished putting him on." Over the next 2 days, Grandpa watched. Eli was mostly himself, playful, kind, protective of me in the way older brothers are. But there were moments, brief, terrible moments. Eli would be mid-sentence and his face would go slack, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. And for a half second, there would be nothing behind his eyes, not blankness, not confusion, but absence. A void wearing skin. Then it would pass and he'd pick up the sentence where he left it. And if you weren't watching closely, you'd never notice. On July 19th, Grandpa made a decision. He told me Eli was going to the swimming hole. He told the sheriff Eli had drowned. He told the search teams to drag the creek. He told my parents their son was dead. And then he took Eli down to the stone room beneath the barn and locked the door. I put the journal down. My hands were shaking. Nina was asleep upstairs. I could hear her breathing through the ceiling, slow and even. The house was dark. The creek, when I checked through a gap in the curtains, was clear again, silver and still. I wanted to believe my grandfather was insane. I wanted that more than I'd ever wanted anything. An old man alone, sliding into dementia, constructing an elaborate delusion around a drowning he couldn't accept. That was the rational interpretation. That was the story that let me close the journal and go to sleep and drive home on Monday and sell the farm and never think about it again. But I'd heard Eli tell me something was under the barn. I was 7 and I remembered it. And Grandpa's journal wasn't the writing of a deluded man. It was meticulous, clinical even. He recorded dates, times, behaviors. He tracked what the thing in the stone room did, how it spoke, what it asked for, how it changed over the years. He noted when it was quiet and when it was loud. He documented its patterns with the same careful attention he gave to rainfall and cattle weight. The thing had never stopped sounding like Eli. That was the part that broke me. 22 years in that room, and it still had his voice. A 12-year-old boy's voice, unchanged, calling out in the dark. I should have left. I should have closed the journal, packed the car, driven Nina back to Knoxville, and called a real estate agent from the safety of our apartment. But I want you to understand something about grief. Grief doesn't make you stupid. It doesn't cloud your judgment. What it does is worse. It makes a certain kind of madness feel like moral clarity. I had lost my brother when I was 7 years old. I had spent 23 years believing he drowned, and now I was being told that he might be alive, changed, wrong, something other than what he was, but alive down there, in the dark, still calling my name. What kind of person walks away from that? I went to the barn on Sunday morning. Nina was in the house, going through the hallway closet. I told her I was checking the barn's foundation for the real estate listing. She didn't question it. Why would she? The main doors groaned when I pulled them open. Inside, the barn was cavernous, a center aisle flanked by empty stalls. The loft overhead thick with old hay and dust motes that drifted in the light from the high windows like something suspended in amber. The air was cool and smelled like dry wood and rust, and underneath, something else. Something I couldn't name, but recognized in the way your body recognizes danger before your mind does. A tightening in the chest, a prickle at the base of the skull. The lower door was on the far wall, at ground level. Heavy oak, iron banded with a ring pull I checked 2 days ago. I walked to it, my boots sounded very loud on the barn floor. I put my hand on the ring and pulled. The door opened onto a stone staircase that descended into the earth at a steep angle. The stairs were hand-cut, rough, uneven, each one slightly different from the last. The walls were stone too, fitted without mortar, and as I leaned into the opening, I could see that they were streaked with something dark. Not blood, mineral deposits, maybe iron leaching from the rock. The air that came up from below was cold and smelled like wet stone and salt at the bottom of the stairs. Maybe 15 feet down was another door. This one was different from anything else on the farm. It was built from stone slabs fitted together like a puzzle, reinforced with iron bands that had been driven into the rock. There was a keyhole, the key from the lockbox. This was the stone door. Rule 7, I stood at the top of the stairs and listened. Silence. For a long time, nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the distant complaint of a crow somewhere outside. I was about to turn away when I heard it. Tapping, 3 slow knocks from below, measured, patient. The sound of knuckles on stone, then a pause, then 3 more. Then, so faint I might have imagined it, a voice. Hello. My legs went weak. I grabbed the doorframe. The voice was thin, muffled by the stone, distorted by the acoustics of the staircase. But it was a child's voice, a boy's voice. Is someone there? Please. I can hear you. Please. I want to tell you I didn't recognize it. I want to tell you it was ambiguous, that it could have been anyone, that the muffling of the stone made it impossible to identify, but that would be a lie. I knew that voice the way I know my own heartbeat. I had heard it in dreams for 23 years. Eli, I said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Then, Caleb. Caleb, is that you? Oh God, Caleb, please. I've been down here so long. Please open the door, please. I sat down on the top step because my legs couldn't hold me anymore. I sat there with my back against the doorframe and my hands over my face, and I listened to my dead brother beg me to let him out. He cried. He told me he was scared. He told me he was hungry. He told me he remembered the fireflies, the night we caught them in mason jars and lined them up on the porch railing, and the whole porch glowed green. And Grandpa sat in his chair and watched us and didn't say anything, but his face was soft. Soft in a way it never was during the day. The thing behind the door knew about the fireflies. I went back to the house. I didn't open the door. I walked into the kitchen and sat at the table and stared at the wall. And Nina found me there 20 minutes later and asked if I was alright. I need to show you something, I said. I showed her the journal. She read it slowly, her face cycling through disbelief and concern, and something that looked increasingly like fear, not of the thing in the barn, but of me. She thought I was having a breakdown. I could see it in the way she held the journal. Gently, the way you hold something that belongs to a person who isn't well. Caleb, she said carefully, your grandfather was alone out here for decades. People in isolation, especially elderly people, they can develop a very elaborate, come to the barn, I said, Caleb. Please, just come listen 1 minute, then we can talk about whatever you want. She came. We stood at the top of the stairs. I called out, Eli, nothing. For a terrible, lurching moment, I was certain I had imagined everything. That the voice was grief and stress and the power of suggestion. That Nina was right. That I was my grandfather's true inheritor, not of the farm, but of his madness. Then the tapping started, 3 knocks. Pause, 3 knocks. Nina's hand closed on my arm. Hard. That's an animal, she whispered. A raccoon or... Caleb, said the voice from below. You came back, I knew you'd come back. Who's with you? I can hear someone breathing. Nina's grip on my arm went from tight to painful. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The voice was clear enough now, echoing up the stone staircase, and whatever it was not a raccoon, it was a boy. A boy who knew my name. A boy who'd been listening to us walk across the barn floor and could distinguish one set of footsteps from two. We went back to the house, and Nina sat on the couch and didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, she said, "We need to call someone." "Who? The police?" "Hi. My dead brother's been living in my grandfather's cellar for 23 years. Could you send a car?" "Yes, exactly that. If there's a person down there." "It's not a person. Read the rest of the journal." "Caleb, I read the journal. Your grandfather was a frightened old man who kept a child locked in a stone room. That's the rational version? That's the one you're comfortable with?" She didn't answer. Outside, the sun was going down. I got up and locked the gates. All 9 of them. When I came back, Nina was sitting exactly where I'd left her, and she was holding the journal open to a page near the end. "What does this mean?" she asked, and showed me the entry. It was dated 2 months before Grandpa died. The handwriting was shaky but legible. It read, "It's getting stronger. It used to only talk when I came down. Now it talks all the time. I can hear it from the house on quiet nights. It started saying Ruth's name. It started saying Caleb's. It never knew those names before. It's learning. It's been down there in the dark for 20 years, and it's been learning, and I think it's almost finished." "Finished? What?" Nina asked. I didn't know. I sat down next to her, and we read the rest of the journal together by lamplight, while the dark settled over the farm and the creek ran silver. And somewhere beneath the barn, something that sounded like my brother waited in patient silence. The last third of the journal was the hardest. My grandfather's writing became less clinical and more desperate. He described conversations with the thing, real conversations, not just words through a door. He'd started going down there, sitting on the stairs, talking to it. He wrote that he knew it wasn't Eli, that he'd always known, but that the thing had Eli's memories and Eli's voice. And sometimes when it spoke about the past, about the summers when the boys were on the farm and the family was whole, it said things that were so precisely right, so perfectly tuned to what Eli would have said, that the distinction between the thing and the boy ceased to matter. "I think part of him is still in there," Grandpa wrote, "mixed in, like a flavor you can't separate from the broth. The thing uses him, wears him, but Eli is in there somewhere, and he is aware, and he knows what's happening to him, and he cannot get out, and I cannot help him. I cannot kill it, because killing it might kill what's left of him. I cannot free it, because what it's becoming would spread. So I feed it, and I talk to it, and I maintain the rules, and I will do this until I die. And then God help whoever comes next." I closed the journal. Nina was crying quietly, her hand over her mouth. I wasn't. Something beyond tears was happening inside me. A door was opening, not the stone one, a different one inside my chest, and behind it was a feeling I don't have a name for, not grief and not rage. Something that contained both and was bigger than either. I want to tell you, I made a rational decision. I want to frame this as a calculated act, a man weighing evidence, considering options, choosing the least bad path, but that would be a lie. What happened next was not rational. It was the most irrational thing I've ever done. And I did it with absolute certainty, and I would do it again. I waited until Nina was asleep. It was past midnight. The house was dark, the creek was clear. Every rule I'd ever been taught was telling me to stay inside, to lock the doors, to wait for daylight. I put on my boots, took the iron key from the lockbox, and walked to the barn. The moon was full. The pasture was silver and empty. The cattle had moved to the far fence, as far from the barn as they could get, and they were all facing the same direction. North, toward the northeast corner. I didn't count them. The barn door opened quietly. I crossed the floor to the lower door. The iron ring was cold. I pulled it open and stood at the top of the stairs, and the air that came up was different now. Not just cold, but charged, electric, like the atmosphere before a storm. "Eli," I said, "I knew you'd come." His voice was calm, not pleading, not desperate. Calm, like he'd known all along. Pop always said you were the brave one. I went down the stairs, 14 steps. I counted each one. At the bottom, the stone door filled the passage completely. There was no gap, no crack, and no space between the door and the frame. The iron bands were flecked with rust but solid. The keyhole was at chest height. I put the key in, Caleb said the voice. And it was so close now, just inches away, just on the other side of the stone. When you open this door, don't be scared. I know I look different, but it's me, I promise. It's still me. I turned the key. The lock mechanism was smooth, oiled, maintained, ready. The stone door was heavy but balanced. It swung inward on iron hinges that my grandfather had kept greased for 22 years. The room beyond was small, maybe 8 feet by 10. Stone walls, stone floor, stone ceiling. No light source, but I could see the moonlight from the staircase reached just far enough. In the corner, sitting with his back against the wall and his knees drawn up to his chest, was a boy. He looked 12. His hair was dark and too long, falling over his forehead the way Eli's always had when Mom forgot to schedule a haircut. His skin was pale, not white, not translucent, just pale, the way anyone's skin would be after 2 decades without sun. He was wearing the clothes Eli had been wearing the last time I saw him. A red t-shirt and jean shorts, both impossibly clean, neither faded nor worn. His feet were bare. He looked up at me, and his eyes were Eli's eyes. Brown, warm, the left one slightly darker than the right. A quirk I'd forgotten until that instant. "Hey, little man," he said, and smiled, and the smile was right. It was exactly right. I carried him out. He weighed almost nothing. His arms went around my neck, and his face pressed into my shoulder. And he was cold. So cold it burned against my skin. But he was real, solid, present. I carried my brother up 14 stone steps and through the barn and into the moonlight. And he lifted his face and looked at the sky and made a sound that I can only describe as recognition. Like someone who'd been holding their breath for 22 years finally exhaling. I brought him to the house. I set him in Grandpa's chair. Nina came downstairs because she'd heard the door, and she stood at the bottom of the staircase in her t-shirt and pajama pants and stared at the boy in the chair. And the boy in the chair stared back at her. "Who?" Nina started. "It's Eli," I said. "It's my brother, Caleb. That's not possible." "I know." Eli looked at Nina. He tilted his head. That gesture, the head tilt, was pure Eli. The thing he did when he was sizing someone up and said, "You must be his wife." He always said he'd marry someone smarter than him. "You look smart." Nina's face was bloodless. She looked at me. I could see her trying to construct a rational framework, an explanation, a diagnosis, an escape route, and failing. Because the boy in the chair was a boy in a chair. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a ghost. He was sitting there with his bare feet dangling above the floor. Too small for the chair, looking exactly like the photograph on Grandpa's nightstand. "I'm Nina," she said, because she didn't know what else to say. "Hi, Nina. Do you have any water?" "I haven't had water in a while." I got him water. He held the glass with both hands and raised it to his lips and sipped. I watched his throat. It didn't move. The water level in the glass didn't change. He set the glass down and smiled at me. "Thanks, little man." That first hour was a kind of fever dream. Eli talked. He remembered everything. The fireflies, the swimming hole, the time I fell out of the hayloft and he caught me, the songs Mom used to sing when she thought no one was listening. He asked about our parents. I told him they'd divorced. He nodded like he'd expected that. He asked about Grandpa, and I told him Grandpa had died, and his face did something complex. Grief layered over, relief layered over something I couldn't read. He was kind to me, Eli said. Down there, he talked to me every day. He never forgot. He locked you in a stone room for 22 years, I said. Yes. Why? What happened to you in the northeast corner? What happened? Eli's face went still. Not slack, still. The difference is important. Slack is passive. Accidental. Still is controlled. Deliberate. Like a person choosing, very carefully, to show nothing. I don't remember. He said he was lying. I knew it instantly. The way, a familiar face in a crowd. Not through analysis, but through recognition. My brother was a terrible liar at 12. And whatever was sitting in my grandfather's chair had inherited that limitation along with everything else. But I didn't push it, not yet. Because I wanted it to be him. I wanted it so badly that I was willing to accept a lie, to let the wrongness accumulate slowly rather than confront it all at once. The wrongness accumulated by the second day, I couldn't ignore it. Eli didn't eat. I put food in front of him. Soup, bread, fruit. And he'd pick it up and hold it and bring it toward his mouth and then set it back down, each time with a different excuse. Not hungry. Stomach hurts. Maybe later. He drank water. Or rather, he raised water to his lips, but the glass never emptied. His clothes didn't wrinkle, his hair didn't move in the breeze from the open window. He sat in the chair for hours without shifting, without adjusting, without the small unconscious movements that a living body makes. He was still the way a photograph is still, and he watched Nina, not the way a person watches another person, with curiosity, with interest, with the natural rhythm of attention and distraction. He watched her the way a predator watches prey, steadily, without blinking, tracking her as she moved through the house, his head turning smoothly to follow her path, his brown eyes, Eli's eyes fixed on her with an intensity that raised the hair on my arms. Nina felt it. On the second afternoon, she pulled me into the kitchen and shut the door. "Something is wrong with him," she said. Her voice was low and flat. Engineer's voice, problem-solving voice. "I've been watching him. And Caleb, he doesn't breathe. I've been counting. He speaks, and air comes out, but between sentences, his chest doesn't move. Not at all. He's been in a room for 22 years. He's not malnourished. He's not dehydrated. He's not traumatized in any way I can recognize. He's perfectly composed. He tells stories, he laughs, he asks about the family, but he doesn't breathe, and he doesn't eat. And he hasn't gone to the bathroom once." And Caleb, she stopped. Her jaw was tight. "He watches me. When you leave the room, he watches me and his face changes. It doesn't look like him anymore. It looks like something trying to be him." I went back to the journal that night, the last entries, the ones I'd skimmed before, and I found the passage that changed everything. Grandpa had written it 6 months before he died, in handwriting so shaky it took me 10 minutes to decipher. "It feeds on love. I understand that now, not fear, not pain, love. The more you love the face it wears, the stronger it gets. I loved Eli. God help me. I loved that boy more than my own life. And every day I went down those stairs and talked to it through that door, I was feeding it. Every memory I shared, every story I told. Every time I said his name, it took that love and it ate it and it grew. It knows everything about Eli because I told it everything about Eli. I gave it my grandson piece by piece, and it used every piece to become more convincing. And I was too weak and too old and too full of grief to stop. It wants to leave. That is the only thing it wants. It wants to leave the property. The land holds it, the iron in the creek, the salt in the stone, the old borders that were set before the family came. As long as it stays within the property line, it's contained. But if it crosses, it's free. It can go anywhere. It can be anyone. And it will find someone to love it. Because that's what it does. It finds the broken places in people, and it fills them with something that feels like love, but isn't. It's been asking me to take it home. It says home and means the city. It says home and means anywhere that isn't here. Every time I say no, it cries. And the crying is Eli's crying, and I have to climb those stairs and close that door and sit in my chair and try to remember that the boy I loved is gone. And what's down there is just the shape of him wrapped around something hungry. I read this passage 3 times. Then I went into the living room. Eli was in the chair. The TV wasn't on. The lights weren't on. He was sitting in the dark, perfectly still. And when I came in, he turned his head toward me and I saw his eyes catch the light from the kitchen behind me. And for a fraction of a second, they reflected wrong. Not the warm brown I knew, but something flat and depthless, like light hitting the surface of a stone. "Hey, little man," he said. "Can't sleep, Eli," I said. "What's in the northeast corner?" The thing in the chair looked at me. The smile didn't leave its face, but it changed, it thinned. The warmth behind it drained away like water through sand. And what was left was the architecture of a smile without any of its meaning. "I told you. I don't remember." "You're lying," it didn't deny it. It sat there, 12 years old forever, wearing my brother's face like a mask that had grown into the skin beneath it, and it watched me with eyes that had nothing behind them. "I want to go home, Caleb," it said. And the voice was still Eli's, still perfect. Still the voice that had told me about the thing under the barn. The voice that had called me little man. The voice that had said my name with the particular emphasis that only an older brother uses. "Take me home. I've been here so long. Don't you want me to come home? What happens if you leave the property?" The smile widened, slowly. Too far. The corners of its mouth pulled back past the point where a face should stop. And I saw for the first time that there were too many teeth. Not sharp, not monstrous, just too many. A double row where there should have been one, packed tight, gleaming white, perfect. "Then I get to stay," it said. And the voice wasn't Eli's anymore. It was still a child's voice, but it belonged to no child I'd ever known. It was thin and old and vibrating with a frequency I felt more than heard. A subsonic hum that made my molars ache. I get to stay and be loved, and I never have to go back down into the dark. It stood up from the chair. It was fast. Not in the way a person is fast, with acceleration and effort, but instantaneous, like a frame had been cut from a film. One moment it was sitting, the next it was standing, and it was taller now. Not 12-year-old tall, my height. Its proportions were wrong. The arms too long, the torso too narrow, the head tilted at an angle that no neck should allow. It still had Eli's face, but the face was stretched over something that wasn't the right shape to hold it. And in the dim kitchen light, I could see the places where it didn't fit. The jaw too sharp, the cheekbones too high, the forehead broad and flat like a stone slab. "Nina," it said, and smiled with all those teeth. "She's sleeping upstairs. She loves you so much, Caleb. I can taste it from here. She would be so easy. She's already halfway open. She misses her father. Did you know that? He died when she was 6. There's a door inside her that she never closed, and I could slip through it, like water. I was between it and the staircase. I didn't remember moving. My body had made the decision before my mind caught up, and I was standing in the hallway with my arms braced against the walls, and the thing that wore my brother's face was watching me from the living room with an expression that might have been amusement. "You can't keep me here," it said. Pop tried. Look what it cost him. His wife, his daughter, his family. 30 years in this house alone, keeping me fed, keeping me quiet, growing old in a place that eats people. You want to do that, give up your wife, your life, your world, to stand guard over something you don't understand? You're not leaving. Then you're staying. That's the choice, little man. Someone always stays. It took a step toward me, then another. Each step was wrong, too smooth, too fluid, the knees bending at angles that made my stomach clench. It moved like something that had studied walking from the inside of a room, and had most of the details right, but not all of them. Or, it said, and it was close now. Close enough that I could smell it. Iron, salt, whetstone, the smell of the cellar, the smell of the deep earth. You could let me go. I'll walk out the gate, and I'll keep walking, and you'll never see me again. You can sell the farm, you can go home to your wife, you can have the life Pop never could. All you have to do is open a gate. I saw what my grandfather saw in that moment, looking at the thing that had my brother's face, and my brother's memories, and my brother's voice. I understood why he couldn't kill it. Because killing it meant admitting Eli was truly gone. Killing it meant there was nothing left of my brother in the world. No trace, no echo, not even a corrupted copy. It meant being alone with the loss forever, with no door to sit beside and pretend. But I also saw what my grandfather couldn't see. Because he'd loved Eli too much and too long to see it clearly. The thing wasn't Eli. It had Eli's memories the way a recording has a singer's voice. A reproduction, convincing in the moment, but empty at the center. My brother was gone. He'd been gone since July 1994. Since something in the northeast corner reached up through the soil and took root in a 12-year-old boy and ate him from the inside. What was left was a hunger wearing a mask. And the mask was so perfect that an old man had spent 30 years feeding it with love rather than face the truth. I was not going to make my grandfather's choice. I was not going to maintain the room. I was not going to spend my life on this farm, locked inside someone else's grief, and I was not going to open that gate. I was going to do the thing my grandfather couldn't. "Nina," I shouted. "Nina, get down here now." The thing moved. It lunged past me toward the staircase with a speed that made the air pop, and I caught it. I don't know how, instinct or adrenaline or dumb luck. I caught its arm, and its skin was cold. Impossibly cold, cold enough that my fingers went numb on contact. And I pulled it back, and it turned on me with Eli's face twisted into something that no human face should be able to produce, and it screamed. This scream was not a child's scream. It was the sound of the earth cracking, of deep stone splitting under pressure, of something ancient and vast and furious being denied. It filled the house. It filled the hollow. Outside, the cattle began to run. I could hear their hooves, panicked, pounding against the frozen ground. Nina was on the stairs. She saw it. She saw the thing that was no longer pretending to be 12, that had unfolded itself to its full height, that was thrashing in my grip with a strength that was dragging me across the floor. She didn't scream. Nina doesn't scream. She grabbed the fire iron from the rack by the hearth and brought it down on the thing's arm, and where the iron struck, the skin split open, and what was inside was not blood, not muscle, not anything that belonged inside a body. It was dark, compact, like soil, like densely packed earth riddled with thin white threads that moved independently, reaching, grasping, recoiling from the iron. The thing shrieked again and pulled free and ran, not toward the door, not toward the stairs, but toward the window. It hit the glass at full speed and went through, and the sound of the breaking window was almost gentle compared to what had come before. I grabbed the fire iron from Nina and went after it. It was running across the pasture. In the moonlight, it was a dark shape moving through the silver grass, and it was heading for the gate. The northwest gate, the one closest to the road, the one that led off the property, and the gate was locked. I'd locked it at sundown, but the thing was fast, faster than anything that moved on two legs should be, and it was already halfway across the field. I ran. I'm not a fast man. I'm 31 years old, 10 pounds overweight, and my left knee has been bad since college. But I ran like I've never run before, because I understood with absolute clarity what would happen if that thing reached the road. It would walk into the world wearing a child's face. It would find someone grieving, someone lonely, someone with a door inside them that they'd never closed, and it would slip through. I caught it at the gate. It was clawing at the iron, and the iron was burning it. I could smell it. The sharp chemical reek of something organic being cauterized, and its hands were blackening, crumbling, the white threads inside writhing and snapping. It turned to face me, Eli's face, still, even now. Even with the body warped and the skin splitting and the impossible architecture of it exposed in the moonlight. The face was still my brother's, the eyes were still brown. The left one was still darker than the right. "Caleb," it said, and its voice was Eli's again. Small, scared, 12 years old. "Please." It hurts so much, I just want to go home. "Don't you remember the fireflies? Don't you remember?" I remembered. God help me. I remembered everything. The jars glowing green on the porch railing, Eli's face in the soft light, Grandpa in his chair with an expression I now understood was not contentment but despair. The expression of a man watching something he loved and knowing it was already lost. "I remember," I said. "I love you, Eli. I'll always love you." I drove the fire iron through its chest. It didn't die like a living thing dies. There was no final breath, no spasm, no fading of the light. The face held for a moment, Eli's face, looking at me with an expression of betrayal so pure and total that I felt something inside me crack, a fracture that I know will never heal, and then it collapsed. The skin went first, caving inward, deflating like a balloon. Then the structure beneath, the dark soil and the white threads crumbling, falling apart, sifting through the grass like ash. Within 30 seconds, there was nothing left but a dark stain on the ground, and the fire iron standing upright in the earth, and the smell of iron and salt and something older than both. I stood there. The cattle were pressed against the far fence, wild-eyed. The creek was still clear. The moon was directly overhead, and my shadow was very small beneath me, and I was alone in a field in the middle of nowhere. And my brother was dead. He'd been dead for 23 years, but now he was truly dead. Finally dead. Dead in a way that couldn't be undone or revisited or held onto, and the grief hit me like a physical force. I sat down in the wet grass next to the dark stain, and I put my head in my hands and I wept. Not for the thing I destroyed, for the boy it had taken, for the old man who'd given his life to guard a door, for the family that had shattered around a lie, for the 23 years of fireflies I'd never gotten back. Nina found me there. She brought a blanket. She sat next to me in the grass and put her arm around me and didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say. We left the next morning. I didn't lock the gate. I didn't check the barn. I didn't leave a plate of food on the fence post. I drove down the gravel road and turned onto Route 32 and didn't look back. And the farm shrank in the rearview mirror, and then disappeared around a curve and was gone. We sold the property through an agent. I never went back. I told the agent to sell it as is, and a family from Nashville bought it 3 months later. Young couple, 2 kids, wanted to homestead. I thought about calling them. I thought about warning them. But warning them about what? The thing was dead. I'd killed it. The northeast corner was just a patch of overgrown land. The stone room was just a cellar. The rules were just an old man's rituals, and the old man was buried, and whatever had lived in the soil was ash in the grass. That's what I told myself for 9 months. That's what I believed. Then the call came. It was the real estate agent. She said the family had some questions about the property. Something about the cattle behaving strangely, something about the creek running clear at night. Something about their 8-year-old daughter who'd been playing near the northeast corner and had come back to the house and sat on the porch steps and stared at nothing and hadn't spoken for 3 hours. And when the girl finally spoke, she asked her mother a question. The mother relayed it to the agent. The agent relayed it to me. Who's the boy in the barn? I hung up the phone. I sat in my kitchen in Knoxville, in the apartment where the walls are thin and the TV is on and everything is safe and normal and far away from the hollow between the ridges. Nina was at work. The sun was shining. The neighbors were mowing their lawn. I picked up the phone and called the agent back. Tell them to lock the gates, I said. All of them. Even the ones that don't lead anywhere. There was a silence on the other end. Then, Mr. Morrow, what? I'll send them a list, I said. 7 rules. They need to follow all of them. I hung up again. I went to the closet and found a box I hadn't opened since we'd come back from Harlan County. Inside was the journal, the photographs, and the iron key. The key that shouldn't have been there. I'd left it in the stone door's lock. And the stone door was in the barn, and I hadn't touched it after that night. But it was here, in the box. In my closet, I picked it up. The iron was warm, and somewhere, very faintly from a direction I couldn't identify, not outside, not from another room, not from any place that existed in the apartment's architecture, I heard 3 slow knocks, pause 3 more. Then a voice, thin and patient and very, very familiar. Hey, little man. I knew you'd come back.